Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. My name is Vince and thanks for joining me for another episode of Secrets of the Trails. Today I'm in Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania at the start of the Coal and Coke Trail. The Coal and Coke Trail is a relatively short trail by cycling standards. It's only about 5 miles long, depending on who you believe in. We'll explore that in a little bit. But it's excellent for those who want a long walk. It abuts the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail, itself a total of 1.8 miles in its current alignment, which makes for a slightly longer trek for cyclists and a headache for hikers because most of it follows local roads. I've ridden this trail several times, and as we'll discover, either one is just too short to be considered separately, so in this video we're going to talk about and ride them both together.
The development of the Coal and Coke Trail traces back to the late 1990s, when development work began along the old Pennsylvania Railroad corridor, now run by the Southwestern Pennsylvania Railroad, and it is an active line. Occasionally you will actually get a train passing through here. Just to let you know that sometimes rail trails actually do still have rails that are active. The development work on the Coal and Coke Trail was led by local organizations, local and county governments, and was supported by the Regional Trail Corporation. According to TrailLink.com, the trail was opened in 2007 and is currently maintained by volunteers of the Coal and Coke Trail chapter of the Regional Trail Corporation. The goal was to create an interborough recreational space for walking, running, cycling, and, reportedly, cross-country skiing, while highlighting the area's industrial heritage.
The first trailhead for the Coal and Coke Trail is here at the Mount Pleasant Trailhead, not too far from Willow Park. The mile markers start at mile 0 from this point. Take a look and you'll see that it's easily accessible from Pennsylvania Route 31. It's right there. It's called Main Street through Mount Pleasant, and not surprisingly, it is the main drag through town. The trailhead is literally at the bottom of the hill, regardless of which way you come through town. If you're coming from the west, you'll turn right, and if you're coming from the east, you'll turn left onto Cook's Way. It's safe to assume that the street was named Cook's Way because Cook's Build-It Hardware used to be right there opposite the parking area. It's since been converted to another business, so that's actually good for the area. The trailhead features marked parking for about 10 vehicles, with one designated for handicapped access. There are a number of benches also around the trailhead, including a covered seating area. But plan ahead, as there are no water or toilet facilities at this trailhead. For those of you who like to explore trailhead towns, the borough placed a town map as a covered seating area. Also, on the side of the former Cook's Build-It Hardware building is a pretty cool mural placed there years ago by community groups and a local college group, highlighting some of the history and features of the town. Also, there is a bike shop in Mount Pleasant called Spoked Wheels that's about halfway up Main Street to the west. But again, plan ahead. According to their website, they're only open from 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday. The other terminal trailhead for the Coal and Coke Trail is in Scottdale, which is about 5 miles that away. So let's mount up and check out the Coal and Coke Trail and the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail. The first bit of the Coal and Coke Trail is paved passing the old Cook lumber buildings, and then it turns into crushed limestone past the trail barriers. On the right here, some of the old outbuildings for the former Cook lumber. And we've got a little S-bend. The treadway width of the Coal and Coke Trail is about 8 feet. The trailheads and access points are paved, and the access ways have anywhere from about 2 to 4 vertical wooden barriers. On the right here is a trail spur leading to Willow Park access point, so let's go check that out. So here is the Willow Park access point. You can see it's an actual park with a pavilion, play area, regular restrooms beyond the second pavilion. There are some porta potties and ball fields, as well as a couple of ball fields behind us here. The gravel lot is unlined and unmarked for handicapped access, but plenty of parking here, good for at least 20 spaces or more. The trail access is accessible from Center Avenue, which is a little bit tricky, so I'll show you a picture. You have to go to the left of the Mount Pleasant Volunteer Fire Station and down a small one-way road with speed bumps to reach the park. Once you get here, to leave the park, you have to just do a one-way all the way up to street roads in Mount Pleasant until you finally get back to Main Street. But notwithstanding this, if you can't find parking at the terminal trailhead itself, this one is pretty close. Now we're back on the main trail, and while we head towards the area known locally as Bridgeport, let's take a brief look at the history of this trailhead town, Mount Pleasant. More information about the history of the trailhead towns is available on secretsofthetrails.com, so please check it out.
Mount Pleasant is one of the oldest towns in southwestern Pennsylvania, reportedly founded in 1797 by Samuel Rumbaugh, who laid out the original town plan. It grew at the crossroads of two Native American pathways, which gave rise to its nickname as the town that grew at the crossroads. This area saw a lot of immigrant settlers, including Englishmen, Scots, Irishmen, and Germans, a number of whom were Revolutionary War veterans, and they established taverns, blacksmith shops, and other businesses to accommodate travelers passing through. Some locals know Mount Pleasant by its old moniker of Helltown. It earned this name during the 1794 Whiskey Rebellion, when the local whiskey boys protested the new whiskey tax and were arrested by federal troops. And guess what Mount Pleasant's zip code is? You guessed it, 15666. Oh, by the way, if you're a craft beer fan, Helltown Brewing has kept the Whiskey Boys spirit alive. It's a great place to stop after you've taken the trail on an out and back. The Mount Pleasant Tap Room is only a few blocks away from the trailhead. If you're spending some time around the trailhead towns, you'll probably see the most famous landmark in Mount Pleasant, the Doughboy. It's a statue of a World War I U.S. Army soldier, or doughboy, and it's placed right in the center of the intersection of Main and Diamond Streets, an area known as the Diamond. Another cool feature of Mount Pleasant is what's called the Mount Pleasant Glass and Ethnic Festival. It's held annually on the last full weekend in September, with lots of food, craft and business booths, games for the kids, and live bands. It's definitely worth checking out if you visit this trail on the last full weekend in September.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed that brief look at some of the highlights of the history of the town of Mount Pleasant. And we are coming into the area known locally as Bridgeport. Buckeye Road crosses over at this point right here. And right here is one of the only interpretive signs on the trail. I'm actually going to put a better picture of it up here in a second. It shows the history and the influence of coal mining in this area. At Buckeye Road, one of the first of several crossovers, and a little bit of a blind hill here, so you got to be really careful. So I always like to stop, look, and listen, but still people like to barrel across. After passing the Buckeye Road crossover, there's an interesting view here on the right that we're going to stop and take a look at for a second. It looks like an old slag heap. Looking at it from this drone view, it doesn't look exceptionally large, but back in late 2022, some AllTrails users noted that the trail was closed around this point. And although I haven't really confirmed why, my guess is that part of the slag heap slid onto the trail and had to be cleared. But as you can see, it's perfectly fine right now. This part of the trail leading up to the Allegheny Power Trailhead up above us is actually running very close to the active rail line. As we get closer to the next trail access, you'll see that the railroad will actually start to diverge from the trail. The nice thing about the Coal and Coke Trail, and you'll see this on some other trails too, I'm going to stop for a second to show you, is they have actual half-mile markers along the trail. I really do like that a lot of these trails, especially the shorter trails, have half-mile markers on them to guide the walker in how far they're going. Obviously, as we just passed that 2.5 mile mark, we're coming up to the Allegheny Power Trail access.
Just short of 3 miles in, we find the Allegheny Power Trail access point here on Sewage Plant Lane. It's accessible from Mount Pleasant Road. It has a good number of parking spaces, approximately 10. They're unlined, and the
lot is gravel. It also has a seating area and a porta potty. But guess why it's called Sewage Plant Lane? The municipal authority's sewage plant for the local area is right there at the end of the road. We're continuing on past the Allegheny Power Trail access point. The trail actually follows along Sewage Plant Lane for a little bit to its intersection with Mount Pleasant Road. So obviously this is a residential area, so just be respectful of the neighbors. Now, Mount Pleasant Road can be very busy at times because there are some industrial complexes up in that direction. So just be very, very careful. Fortunately, I think we got a break here this morning. As we've crossed over Mount Pleasant Road, we're not too far away from the 3-mile mark. The trail now passes under US Route 119. Which is a 4-lane highway that starts in southern Kentucky and ends in north central Pennsylvania. This section is paved until we get across the bridge that's coming up, and I'm going to stop here for a second because this is a nice peaceful area that I want to show you. This is a small lake that seems to be fed by Sherrick Run. That's a stream that passes underneath that bridge and feeds into Jacobs Creek down that way. We can't see it right now because of the vegetation. But this is a nice place to stop and chill for a bit. A nice little bench and relaxing area, notwithstanding the traffic noise from the highway. And there's also a plaque honoring the memory of Dwayne Woolley, who was a founding board member of the Coal and Coke Trail. And back on the roll, going over this bridge over Sherrick Run. And here is the 3-mile mark. And we're on the roll up toward the Mildred Street Trailhead. As we approach the Mildred Street Trailhead, we're going to get a little bit of an upslope here, so just be careful, because if you like to pedal harder to gain the upslope, you really want to be careful, because right there is the road, right after the trail barriers. Almost 4 miles on the trail. Here is the Mildred Street Trail access. It's just outside of the town of Scottdale proper. It's actually a small access point with space for maybe about 9 vehicles back to back, gravel, unlined. There are no amenities at this trail access. So let's keep on going. The trail follows Mildred Street to its intersection with Overholt Drive, which is the 4-mile mark. Obviously, should go without saying, residential area, be respectful of the neighbors, stay off private property, and watch for material on the road surface that might damage your tires. So here at the intersection of Overholt Drive and Mildred Street, the trail actually turns to the left. Now, as I mentioned a bit ago, if you do want a side trip to West Overton Village during the season, you'll just make the right here onto Overholt Drive, go up to Porter Avenue. You'll have to cross that busy road in order to get to West Overton Village itself. Just beware that this section of Overholt Drive is not marked for bicycle access, so just be careful, because motorists may not expect to see a bike on this part of the road. But the trail goes this way, so this is where we're going. Now, along Overholt Drive here, the treadway is laid out on the roadside for about 2/10 of a mile until it veers right away from the road surface. But here I'm going to dismount for a second because I want to show some potential dangers to cyclists. Now, thanks to whoever actually constructed this portion of the trail, you can see several rectangular and square drain culverts along the treadway. they're actually right in the treadway. Some of them, like this one, are really, really deep. You can just imagine that going over this at any decent speed is going to bend your rim and ruin your day. Also, at the time this video is made, there are still some significantly deep ruts transversely across the trail. So I don't know if you really want to run over those unless you have a really good dental plan. So if you're like me, you may want to just avoid the treadway at this section altogether until the chapter fixes these significant dangers to cyclists. And mounting back up, I'm going to follow my own advice and just roll on the roadside for a bit. And it's right here that we can jump back onto the treadway. They actually paved this little section that goes up a small upslope and along this fenced area. Now along this fenced area, if you have an aversion to being electrocuted, you're gonna love this. The trail runs for this short distance along this fenced area, and the signs bear an ominous warning. So just be careful and don't come too close to the fence. While the inner fence might be electrified, I'm not willing to find out if that extends to the outer fence. Past the scary fence there, we go down a small downslope, and this technically is the start of the Jacobs Creek multi-use trail in its current configuration. This half mile, or a little bit better than half mile segment, is actually paved. And we're close to the 4.5 mile mark, and we have another spur that goes off into Kendai Park, so let's go check that out. Kendai Park is a pretty large park associated with the Coal and Coke Trail itself, as well as Scottdale Borough. But to get to the trailhead itself, you have to actually go on Mount Pleasant Road for a little bit over to the Kendai Park parking area itself. So this is the Kendai Park trail access point. Large park, you can see it's all gravel and grass, and it had to be large because it's the home of the local youth soccer association. Also available are ball fields, seating areas, restrooms, and a porta potty, as well as a small playground. So if you have young children walking or riding with you, this isn't a bad spot to sit and rest for a bit. And coming back off of the spur, we come to the rest of this about half mile segment that's paved. And somebody asked me one time, how do you know that this section is the Coal and Coke Trail as well as the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail? Well, we haven't actually finished the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail yet, but look right there. Coal and Coke Trail, 4.5 miles. So it's still the Coal and Coke Trail, folks. Now you can start to see Jacobs Creek here, and I'm gonna turn around for a little bit. I'm actually going to stop for a second and show you some of the nice views of Jacobs Creek. I believe there was a big rainstorm that came through this area about a day or two ago, so mid-August, and we have actually some decent water flow through here. Jacobs Creek is also used by canoers and fishers, so there are some canoe launches and fishing spots along Jacobs Creek. And we've come to just about mile 5 here on the Coal and Coke Trail and the Scottdale trailhead. Interestingly though, this sign designates it as the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail and makes no mention of the Coal and Coke Trail. However, the Scottdale trailhead here is paved and space for 18 vehicles with 2 designated as handicapped access. It does have a couple of benches and a pavilion there, a covered seating area as well, but there are no other amenities at this location. So I've dismounted for a bit because I'd like to go over what I think is a really weird situation with these two trails, particularly based on the trail app that you might use. According to the Colon Coke Trail brochure, this trailhead is the end of the Colon Coke Trail, but it's also claimed to be the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail. The Colon Coke Trail chapter itself quotes the trail length as 5 miles on the brochure that was published in 2014, with the terminal trailheads here and at Mount Pleasant where we started. And while the chapter doesn't have its own website for the trail's webpage on Pennsylvania's Department of Conservation and Natural Resources claims the length is 4.76 miles. AllTrails.com, an app I use a lot, claims that the trail length is 3.8 miles or a 7.6 mile out and back because they like to do the out and back thing, with the start and end point of their out and back trail length calculation being the Mildred Street trailhead. AllTrails has a separate entry for the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail, citing it as being 0.6 miles or a 1.2 mile out and back. But a closer look reveals that AllTrails has a bit of a problem here because not only do they shorten the Colon Coke Trail length and tracking by a good 1.2 miles based on the chapter zone map, they also reverse the start point of the trail. In addition to this glaring error, AllTrails misses a good 0.6 miles between the Mildred Street trailhead and where they put the turnaround point for the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail. The National Rails to Trails Conservancy and their companion mobile app TrailLink combines both trails in their tracking, giving the combined trail length at 6.1 miles point to point from the trailhead parking on Cook's Way to Garfield Park in Scottdale. Now, why does this all really matter? I guess it really doesn't, but I'm curious enough to want to point out all the inconsistencies in the tracking for these trails, which is kind of the point of this channel and the website in the first place. It's good to have some ground level info on a trail, especially if you've never ridden it before. But anyway, here at the Scottdale Trailhead, this is mile 5 and the technical end of the line for the Colon Coke Trail. But this is just a waypoint on the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail in its current alignment. Remember when I said that the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail started at the pavement down there a little over a half mile down that way? It's technically where it starts, but it ends, for now, at Garfield Park in Scottdale. You'd think it's called Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail because it follows Jacobs Creek the whole way, but it actually doesn't right now. The trail should continue along the creekside at this point. Looking from above, it appears that there is a right-of-way carved out along the creekside, but it's never been developed. There are even some metal fence barriers in place along this right-of-way where it would cross over local roads. We'll touch on some long-range plans in a bit, but for now, the current alignment takes the remainder of the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail along the streets through the town of Scottdale and ends at Garfield Park. So before we remount and hit the rest of this trail, let's take a quick peek at the history of the other terminal trailhead town today, Scottdale.
The area around Scottdale was originally known as Fountain Mills. The nearby village of West Overton, founded in the early 1800s around a rye distillery, attracted many settlers to the area, and the town of Fountain Mills was formed along the banks of the nearby Jacobs Creek, where many of the mills utilized its flowing water. After the railroads brought more prosperity to the town, in 1874 it was renamed Scottdale in Thomas Scott's honor. Mennonites were among the early settlers of the area. The Mennonite Publishing House was based in Scottdale until 2002, and there is still a Mennonite presence in the region. Scottdale was a coal and coke industry hub thanks to the hundreds of mining operations, coke ovens, and railroads in the area. And while the coal and coke industry has since declined, Scottdale has continued to adapt. The Southwestern Pennsylvania Railroad maintains an active rail yard in Scottdale. The Scottdale Historical Society works to preserve the history and heritage of the town. The annual Scottdale Fall Festival, held the third weekend in September, features great food, craft booths, games for the kids, and live bands, and it's sure to capitalize on the fact that Scottdale's 150th birthday is this year.
Okay, so let's mount up and check out the rest of the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail such as it is today. So the rest of the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail as it's currently aligned follows the streets of Scottdale until it ends at Garfield Park. First thing you'll notice is this nasty speed bump here. So obviously it should go without saying, just edge over it gently. The one nice thing that you'll notice in Scottdale Borough that they've done with the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail alignment is they've put painted signs on the road surface directing the cyclists which way to go and how to follow the trail. This is Mount Pleasant Road and Scottdale Borough building ahead of us there with the local magistrates and a police station on the side there. And we're coming up to a major intersection with North Broadway across some railroad tracks. Again, very active railroad tracks. So here at the intersection of Mount Pleasant Road and North Broadway, this is a very busy intersection. So obviously you want to be very, very careful here because sometimes it can be very busy. But the trail actually goes to the right and then makes an immediate left up Edwin Avenue. Once on Edwin Avenue, it's through this intersection that has an opposite side stop up to Spring Street, where we'll make a left to continue the trail. Before we turn left, Laux Park is before us. It actually doesn't have anything to do with the trail. However, it's a nice large spot if you're so inclined and you want to take a break somewhere along the way. Here's another great spot to do it. Full restrooms over there, by the way. But we'll make a left here onto Spring Street. Some of the streets, again, are opposite side stop and some are your side stop, so just obviously always roll through them carefully. Interesting too about these two segments of Spring Street, they have these old style paving stones. As we continue on Spring Street, we'll be passing the Scottdale Public Library, and here's where the trail gets a little tricky. If you look closely at the painted signs on the road, the trail actually leads into Gazebo Park. Thankfully, it's easy to follow because of all the painted road signs. I'm going to stop here for just a bit to show you a few things. This is Gazebo Park, so named because it has a gazebo, and it is the focal point of the annual Scottdale Fall Festival, which, as I mentioned in the history a little bit ago, Scottdale is celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. So if you have an opportunity to come and check out the Scottdale Fall Festival, it's always the third weekend in September. Come on and check it out. The other weird thing is, apparently Google Maps didn't get a message. There's Stoner Street, but this is also, according to Google Maps, Stoner Street. As you'll see on this inlay here, they actually marked Stoner Street all the way through the park. So my guess is that whenever the park was constructed, Stoner Street had to be taken out in order to make room for the park, but apparently Google Maps never got the memo. The trail actually marks as exiting Gazebo Park here along the quote-unquote Stoner Street sidewalk, I guess, and we'll cross over Pittsburgh Street at this point. The nice thing about Pittsburgh Street here is it is a one-way street. It is one of the other main drags in town, but I do want to call your attention to the fact that even though there are no designated seating areas and no bike racks here, there is a bike rack over here in the park and some seating areas in the park, but there are a couple of restaurants, including my favorite, Bad Rabbit Cafe and Roastery. So if you're into the coffee house fair, you may want to stop here and take advantage of the food and the drinks that they have on offer here. It's a really great place. So we're going to cross over Pittsburgh Street. The trail leads us on to Stoner. And turns left here onto O'Neill Alley. Obviously, because this is an alley, you want to be very, very careful and watch the surface for any kind of things that might puncture your tires. And oh, by the way, there are no bicycle shops in Scottdale. Turning right here onto this unnamed alley. If anybody knows what the name of this alley is, I looked and I tried and I couldn't find it. So I'm just calling it Unnamed Alley. How's that sound? But the trail travels along this unnamed alley for 7 blocks, finally turning left onto Church Street and down to Garfield Park. The alley runs beside Brillhart Hardware. It's a local Ace hardware store. And finally, as we reach the intersection of Church Street, you can see the signs are pointing us to the left. And our intersection with now South Broadway, it moves from north to south at Pittsburgh Street. Again, very busy road. Be careful crossing. At the end of Church Street is Garfield Park, but I do want to call one more piece of attention here to something that's really unusual down here. I mentioned that Scottdale Borough put these road signs on the pavement, and there's another one that points to the right, indicating that the trail is supposed to go in that direction. However, there's nothing there except an open gate. The Coal and Coke Trail chapter indicated in their brochure and on their Facebook page that there's a long-term goal in mind for this trail. Apparently, the goal is to connect this trail all the way down Jacobs Creek to where it spills into the Youghiogheny River, and then to connect the trail with the Great Allegheny Passage. It's clear that the intention is for this trail to continue at this point down to the gap, but for now there doesn't seem to be any clear right-of-way, so it's blocked from access. So for now, the terminal trailhead for the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail and our ride today is here at Garfield Park. Garfield Park has a good number of amenities. The parking is all single file and paved, with additional gravel parking close to Jacobs Creek itself. So all told, there's space for about 15 vehicles. The parking is also used for the canoe launch. There's also a porta potty available, bike rack, seating areas, a ball field, tennis and basketball courts, and a playground area. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at the Coal and Coke Trail and the Jacobs Creek Multi-Use Trail. These are excellent and well-maintained sub-10-mile trails for various outdoor activities with multiple mid-trail access points for people who just want to use a small portion of the trail. The scenery is diverse, from scenic wooded areas to quaint town vignettes, and there are multiple options at the trailheads to rest and play or eat and drink. And no matter how long you want to claim that this trail is, it's an easy ride overall and can be used pretty much throughout the year, weather permitting. And just as a personal aside, I'm really hoping that the planned extension of this trail to the Gap is realized someday. I think that would be an awesome ride. And if that happens, you can be sure I'll make a separate video about that segment. But for now, that's all the time I have for today. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope to see you next time for another episode of Secrets of the Trails. Have a great ride.